So our featured topic is brought to you by none other than Rob Sherberth, who is Senior Training Professional with Overton Safety Training. Rob, we really appreciate you jumping on board today and providing us some valuable information. It's always a pleasure to have you, sir.
Thanks, Rhett. Pleasure to be here. Great to see some of these faces I haven't seen in years at this event. So thanks for joining. How's the audio? Check. Audio okay?
Audio's good, Rob.
Great. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen. Just to give you guys a sort of a summary of what we're going to do here, I've got about a 20-slide presentation that I'm going to do. There we go, thank you. I've got about a 20-slide presentation I'm going to do explaining some of the rule changes and updates that are coming down the pike based on the draft that LNI has been discussing with stakeholders over the last couple of years. Actually, it's really been delayed quite a bit due to not being able to have meetings and getting placed in the pecking order, but it sounds as though that rule might be on the slate for implementation mid 23. So there's some rule changes coming up. CCO, formerly NCCCO, has created a telehandler operator certification program to eliminate the need to have telehandler operators that are, or forklift operators, PIT operators that are operating machines with suspended loads from hoists or hooks, to be more specific to a telehandler operator as opposed to a crane operator. So I'm going to discuss those programs, and then that'll take us to probably about 10 o'clock with some questions and answers. We'll take a break, and if anybody wants to come back at the end of that, I've got about a 35-minute video presentation I can share with you that is actually a drone camera footage of the practical exam being done during the pilot process. One of the things that I didn't mention in the presentation, I'll mention now, is CCO is going away with their candidate videos that they offer presently for all the other programs. So this is kind of the one opportunity you would have to be able to see the practical exam being conducted from an aerial drone view. So if you want to stick around and watch that, I'll show that at the end. But let me go ahead and share my screen here. Get this. And by the way, we have some pretty heavy subject matter experts on the call with us today. I invited James Hyatt. He's the Pape Rents Magni rep for for Pape, which really covers the entire West Coast, quite frankly. And he's a subject matter expert and manager for that product. Jason from Pape is on the call as well. Bill Sloniker from LNI Crane Compliance is on the call, and we might even get a pop in from either Tara from CCO or Tom Sicklesteel from CCO. So they've been invited and said they'd get on the call if they had a chance. So without further ado, let's move into the presentation. This is the kind of the machine, if you will, even though Manitou's been out there for many years, that has really brought the attention to the industry that there are telehandler forklifts out there that not only lift loads palletized, but boy, do they have some attachments and some capabilities and 360 degrees of rotation. So as a result, we see these on every job site we drive past, using hooks and using hoists. So they're included in the OSHA regulation, 1926 subpart CC, the crane rule that was published in 2009 and updated throughout the 2000s, if you will, finalized in 2018, does include the requirement for an operator certification / qualification when operating a powered industrial truck when configured to hoist, meaning lift. The word hoist means lift. I've argued that point, and that's not a valid argument. So a hoist is a noun and a verb, in this case being used as a verb. So when you're being used to hoist with hook or winch. So as a result, bio there. I think Rhett and Brian, we make these available, correct? These are available?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
No problem. All right, so let's talk about Washington standards as they exist today. As the Washington standard exists today from the 155 Part L, the current, and I paraphrase this to sort of get rid of the numbers and combine things, but currently a powered industrial truck, when configured to hoist, and again, you have to look at that word as a verb, not as a noun. It is not only with a winch. It is hoisting, meaning to lift or lower. So to hoist and lower by means of a winch or hook and horizontally move a suspended load are exempt from operator certification. That's the current language in the WAC. It's been that way since 2010. However, operators must follow the requirements in 863, which is the forklift and powered industrial truck standard. However, the rest of Part L still applies when operating this telehandler in construction. So the power line regulations, the requirement for a lift director, the requirement for a qualified rigger, the requirement for qualified signal persons, everything else within Part L still applies. The only thing that was exempted in the language of the rule was the requirement for an operator certification. Now, FYI, OSHA 1926 subpart CC did not include that exemption. So OSHA, if you literally eliminate the green from this first paragraph or this first sentence, power industrial trucks are included when configured to hoist and lower by means of a winch or hook and horizontally move a suspended load. So the ability to move a load horizontally could be through boom extension, through boom up, boom down, or through rotation. There's a little misconception in the industry. There was even some misconception in the telehandler development task force that I participated in that this would only include rotating telehandlers. Well, the fact of the matter is a fixed boom telehandler that only can extend, retract, boom up, and boom down still has the ability to move the load horizontally. So it also meets the intent and the language of the rule. So that's the current language in the WAC. The proposed language, and a couple of years now we've been batting this around, but power industrial trucks or forklifts, when configured to handle and horizontally move a suspended load, are only exempt from the certificate of operation and the crane certifier accreditation. So presently, your cranes have to be certified through an accredited crane certifier, et cetera. That will still not be required per the language in the proposed language. However, you need to see the appropriate WAC, which I left the code number out of it, but it's the 53300 rule, which I'm going to show you in the next slide, for operator qualification and certification requirements, as well as powered industrial truck. So we've got this power industrial truck standard that applies generally as a core rule, right? It's an 800 standard that applies to all industries. And then we've got our 155 Part L proposed language here that will require, because there is no quote unquote exception for operator certification. So here's the proposed language under operator qualification. Prior to operating any crane or equipment covered by this rule, with the exception of the operator in training, the employer must ensure that the operator meets the requirements of operator qualification and certification. And at this point, I just have to point out the term certification is a term that applies to an accredited testing organization testing the competency to meet the minimum level of knowledge, really, and skill as a competent person. It doesn't eliminate the qualification side of things. Qualification is still an employer-based obligation to ensure that not only does that person have the credential, i.e. the CCO card or the CCR card, or, well, really that's about it now. I think OECP, the operating engineers, still have an accredited program. And there's also one other one based out of Idaho for electrical workers that is accredited, but it doesn't include this telehandler at this time. So an accredited certification, in addition, the employer is required to complete the qualification. That is an evaluation of the operator setting up the machine, configuring the machine, operating the machine in an environment that would be appropriate or relevant to the environment that they would typically operate. That is still the responsibility of the employer. It's clearly spelled out in subpart CC. It's part of the new proposed rule. So we've eliminated the hourly requirement. WAC has eliminated those hours per machine type from the 5300 rule, but the employer qualification evaluation requirements are still in that rule. So those do exist. So generally, PIT or telehandler operators will be included if using a hoist or hook, and that is presently the language, hoist or hook, to lift in place. And I use the word lift in place instead of hoist and lower to eliminate confusion, whether it's a rotating boom or a non-rotating boom. In fact, I don't believe our rule presently disparages between any type of powered industrial truck. So a powered industrial truck is a powered industrial truck. This certification happens to apply to the telehandler, the reach ability of the telehandler forklift or a powered industrial truck. But if you read the language of the law, literally any forklift that's used to lift and lower and has the ability to move the load horizontally would be included in Part L. So this is basically what it says here in the proposed language. Now, Bill and I were just talking about this before the call. Operator qualification must be applicable to the certification that is applicable to the machine type. Presently, and I mean literally as of today, there is no accredited organization that offers a telehandler operator certification program or even a forklift operator certification that's accredited. Therefore, the crane certification for the appropriate style of machine would satisfy the requirements of this paragraph. However, now that there is an accredited program, or there will be, January 4th, I believe, is the live date for the written exam. Once that program becomes effective and available, then there is a program available. And the guideline is the certification must be appropriate for the machine that's in use. So my question was, if somebody already has a mobile hydraulic crane certification, does that qualify them or certify them per se for the telehandler? Well, by the language in this statement right here, it does not. It must be most similar, and the certifying agency is going to determine what that is. My boss, Ron Overton's on that task force or that management committee that decides which machine type falls under which certification classification. Presently, a telehandler forklift would fall under the appropriate mobile crane certification, but that's not going to be the case moving forward since there will be a certification available. So that's our Washington standards, rules, regulations as existing today and as proposed. The federal OSHA regulations, 1926 subpart CC, are in existence as of today. They've been in existence since 2018 when the repealed rule was finally finalized. There is no exception to the rule under OSHA regulated states. If you follow under subpart CC, under the operator certification qualification section, certification must be appropriate to the type of machine. If there is no appropriate machine type certification, it must be the most similar type, and the employer evaluation or qualification is required. There is no waiting on mid-year, next year, what have you, from an OSHA perspective. That rule's in effect, it's been in effect, and quite frankly, you could be held to the compliance standard.
Rob, Jason Hagquist has a question. Jason, if you still have that question, please let Rob know.
Yeah, go ahead and shout it out because for some reason I can't see my chat box. So if you could just shout that out, that'd be fantastic.
Oh, no problem, Ron. Hey, so I got a question. So you said a hook and a winch. What about a shackle or, you know, I mean, we do have some telehandlers out there that do have shackles and not a hook.
Correct. On a technicality, I'm not going to make Bill get off of his paternity leave and answer this question, but that is a nuance that would not meet an exception, as per some of the conversations I remember having. If it's a attachment point on the machine that is being used with rigging, as opposed to the fork that is being used for a palletized or a forked load, if you will, then it would fall under the rule. And I think, you guys saw those pictures I was showing here as I went through. I mean, there's no doubt. You throw a winch. This thing actually has a luffing jib on there where you use the tilt feature on the machine to actually luff and be able to move the hoist up and down or the jib up and down. There's no doubt that is being used as a crane in this configuration. This one's pretty cool. It's got that elevated cab. But with a hoist, with a hook, with a shackle connected to an anchorage point, the point is the machine is being used and configured to lift and hoist or hoist and lower loads, can move the loads horizontally. Technicality, but I think
I can speak to that too, Rob, if you'd like, real quick.
Are you willing to? Thanks, buddy.
I'm holding a baby, though. I'm going to warn everybody. So the draft language, it'll be changed to read powered industrial trucks, forklifts, when configured to hoist or lower a suspended load like a crane are only exempted from, and then I won't finish it. But basically, it was trying to clean up the intent that if you're using a forklift like a crane, we're not going to get down to if you're hooking a shackle to anything or rigging over the forks, whatever. If you're using it like a crane, it'll apply. All right, I'm gonna get back off.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Bill. Any other additional questions on rules, regulations before we move on to the specific certifications? Rhett, thanks for letting me know. If you see a hand up, let me know. For some reason, like I said, my screen isn't showing me that chat box. All right, well, let's move on. I did mention CCO is now CCO. It was NCCCO for nearly 30 years, but they've rebranded, retrademarked to CCO. I do have permission to show this and to talk not on their behalf, but rather as a proud offer of their training program or of their training for CCO certification. I got to clarify that. CCO does not train, CCO tests. The accredited testing agency has developed an exam specific for telehandler. In fact, it's called the THO certification. Now, within the THO certification, there is a rotating THO certification for most of those machines that I've shown you up to this point, and a non-rotating, or what we would refer to as a fixed. And I've got some more pictures and some explanation about that. This particular program, very similar to some of the other smaller machine programs that CCO offers, consists of only one written exam. So unlike the mobile crane where you'd have to take a core test plus a specialty test for each appropriate machine, there is just one 70-question multiple choice test. You get 60 minutes. There's no load chart calculations, although there are some load chart configurations where you have to determine position of the boom or position of the load and determine an appropriate position on the chart. But they're non-calculative questions. When we did our cut score based on the written exam, it was amazing how poor the scores were, how low the score was. So it actually brought the cut score, the average score, passing score, down to 65. Basically that's 65% out of 100, although it's scaled by domain. I can show you those domains here by looking at the candidate handbook. Let's see if this hyperlink works. Beautiful. So this is a CCO candidate handbook that actually describes and goes through the written examination process. And these are what they refer to as domains. So each CCO exam is created based on what the knowledge requirements would be for that operator to be considered minimally competent. So this core test consists of domain 1, which is pre-operational inspection. It's 22% of the written exam. Domain 2, which is job site conditions at 15%, pre-lift preparations at 25%, and operations at 38%. And for those of you that are not familiar with the CCO process, all this information is available on cco.org website under the appropriate certification. So there's no reason for somebody to come into a test unprepared, because this is an outline of the exam, essentially. These are all of the things, all of the required knowledge that's required for a minimally competent operator. So the score is going to be based on the performance within those 4 domains, and it's scaled. The reference list that was used to develop the exam includes the ASME or ANSI standard for the telehandler rough terrain forklifts, which is a B56.6, and you see it's a fairly modern edition, the 2021 version. And then over on the right here, the OSHA regulations that were also used include 1910-178. And you're going to see that had a big impact on this, because presently, under subpart CC and under the WAC, et cetera, crane operator certification is a 5-year certification. However, 1910-178, or in Washington 863, require reevaluation at 3 years. This particular certification is only a 3-year certification through CCO. And at the end of the time period, or within the time period, not only do you have to take the written exam to recertify, you also have to take the practical, the hands-on exam. This is, I think, the signaling is the only other one that requires a practical exam as recertification. So that's a pretty big impact on this. It includes the 1910 standard, or I'm sorry, the 1910-180 general industry crane standard. Slings, of course, have to be covered. Rigging has to be covered because of the suspended load situation. Federal OSHA subpart CC, rigging for construction, 251, and then there's a equipment operations section or machine section in subpart O of OSHA as well. And there's a document out there, a manual out there called the AEM. So these are the references that were used to create this 70-question exam. And again, the scores during the cut score.
Rob, you accidentally went on mute.
There we go. Sorry about that.
All right.
I know sometimes hitting like the space bar or whatever will put you into a weird spot, but I must have hit a button. Thank you, sir. Because I'm not sure what point you didn't hear me, Bri.
It was brief, Rob, but
okay.
That black box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, if you could minimize that,
yep,
that'd be great. Thanks. Perfect.
Yeah, that's why I can't unmute. I
I know.
my little black box.
There you go. Keep talking.
I do these classes all the time on this. For some reason, it's not working. I appreciate that. So because this is one of the newer programs being offered, the newest at this point, the decision was made to never create what we call a pencil paper exam for this particular program. So this exam will never be offered to the public as a fill out the bubble sheet, read a written test in a proctored environment. All of the testing for this program has to be done computer-based. It could be computer-based testing at an existing computer-based site after an application. There's a couple other things that are coming new in 2023 that would take hours for me to explain. John Kirk's on the call. He's going to be the guy you want to talk to if you want to find out what is OPT and EOT, which is event-based testing, or I can't even remember what OPT stands for, but it's basically the ability for an operator to take a written test on a laptop or on a computer in a appropriate environment. versus as a group. So the event-based is as a group versus the OPT, which is an individual written exam on a computer. So that begins January 4th. And again, I mentioned this is a 3-year recertification. It's the only CCO program that's less than 5 years, and it is the only program that requires both a written and a practical exam to complete the recertification process. That's pretty significant. The practical exam itself was created over the last 12 months. We've been having live meetings, getting together. We use Magnes primarily for every single event just because they were a title sponsor of the event, and made sure that we had a machine at every one of the meeting locations. So you'll see a lot of Magne pictures here, but there are some others out there. In fact, I believe there are now 4 domestically available rotating telehandlers that have the ability to add attachments to hoist jibs, hooks, etc., in addition to the huge line of fixed machines. So this practical exam, again, the minimum passing score of the practical is now 75, consists of a fixed boom practical for non-rotating. There has to be some parameters established based on the reach of the machine. So the minimum reach is going to be 28 feet, and that 28 feet basically applies to a telehandler that would have a 44, maybe a 42 in its, and a 42 if it had an attachment like a truss boom at the end, that would definitely work. But it's a machine that's going to have at least 42 to 44 foot of vertical height, which gives the outreach in that 28 to 30 foot range. The reason for that, I'm going to show you the little demonstration practical exam layout here. But the machine has to have the ability to reach to the end of the course at a certain angle, given the sling configuration and the test weight configuration, to properly determine the skill of the operator. Now, there's a lot of 19s out there, and there's a lot of smaller booms out there. They would fall under the appropriate certification. They just can't be used for practical testing. And that same situation exists with mobile cranes that are being used for mobile crane testing. They have to meet a certain length to be able to do the course, to be able to meet the accreditation. So there is a minimum length position or reach position for a fixed boom. The rotators, we have not found that to be a problem. They are all pretty darn long booms. Generally, the models that are, anywhere over, I think I misspoke here when I say 80 feet. I think it's anything over 67 foot of boom that has at least a 40-foot radius capability of lifting 800 pounds can be used. You see this one's got very little boom extension. This is a 6 series, 625, I believe. This one's got very little boom extension to be able to reach that position on the course, but the far corner is at about a 36-foot radius. So it does require capacity at radius as long as it meets those parameters. And those parameters are all set in the site coordinator handbook that I believe is being finalized as we speak. What we found during pilot testing is the approximate time to test is about 40 minutes for the fixed machine and almost 50 minutes for the rotating machine. This is also the only practical exam that actually requires setup. So the operator has to set the outriggers, be able to lift the machine, level the machine, and utilize the machine, and then secure the outriggers and stow the machine as well. They're not evaluated tasks, but they are tasks that are performed within the scope of the test. And okay, so there are some guidelines there. One of the biggest things we found is space is going to be the largest challenge. There are very few job sites where you're going to be able to set up a telehandler practical examination course. Requiring a space that's over 90 by 105, and that 105 is really skirting the minimum. It really puts the candidate at a disadvantage. If the course was a little bit longer, the candidate would have a little bit better chance to succeed. Needs to be mostly level, I think, within 5% within 5% from one end to the other. The ground's going to have to be pretty durable because there are some tight turns, and these wheels can do some damage to some terrain over time. So I'll show you those layouts. This is a layout for the fixed. This is a non-rotating telehandler, just a example of one. You see it does have a fork attachment on the carriage. It does also have a hook underhung from the boom nose there. Contrary to what people are gonna accept or like, that hook will not be able to be used for the practical exam. We have to be able to attach or use an attachment as part of the practical. So an attachment to either replace the forks on the carriage or to slide onto the forks must be used for the practical exam on these fixed telehandlers. But this is a sample of the course here. The course consists of a corral that is a starting, stopping, ending position. There's what we call the driving range, which is an area where the machine will be driven both in forward and reverse directions through the duration of the task or the test. There's a goalpost task, which I'm going to show you in detail. We've got our pallet stacking task utilizing DA1 and DA2, where the telehandler operator will pick up a pallet, stack it onto DA2, pick up both pallets, bring them back to one, unstack from one, and place back in two. It's a driving, alignment, orientation, but it also was necessary to cover the requirements of the general industry. The course itself, this is the entire area of the course. You see here shows 105 by 90, but again, this top edge of the course here is really going to be a disadvantage if it's only 105 feet, because one of the requirements or one of the tasks is to, you got to drive the machine, park the machine here, position and do this task. The next task, you got to come over here and pick this up, and then you got to drive backwards through the driving range. After you've done the stacking, you got to drive back this way. Well, we found that a lot of people were driving far beyond this 105 foot, and we gave quite a bit of extra space at this end as well. So it's really closer to 130, 140 foot to really make it, to really give that driver, especially based on the size of the chassis, really good opportunity to succeed. This is some of the details of the fixed telehandler, the non-rotating. This is the actual, what we call a corridor. This is it, the photos of the corridor. What you can't see here is where the machine would be parked, but the machine would be parked here off to the left. That's right here on this line, close to that designated area, the test weight in that area. And the task is simply to literally pick up the load with the chain over the hurdle, touch the chain to the ground, over the hurdle, touch the chain to the ground, over the hurdle, and place the load within the perimeter of the barrier, doing it one direction and then coming back the opposite direction. It's a pretty decent challenge, doing it quickly, within time, not knocking over the hurdles, which are just literally 1-inch PVC tubes sitting on top of a small notch. The chain has been shortened for this task, so it makes it a little bit more challenging. And there's definitely some depth perception challenges with this particular test. Now, the thing about the fixed telehandler is if you take the practical, there's only one written test. If you take the 70-question test, if you happen to pass, you take the fixed telehandler practical exam. That is all you're certified to operate as a fixed, non-rotating telehandler. However, if you take the rotating telehandler practical exam, which you see the course looks pretty similar, we just added a little bit of length to the course and forced the operator to be able to swing and maneuver the load, that also covers the non-rotating telehandler. So one practical for the rotator would include the requirements for both the fixed and the rotating telehandler. This is a layout of that course. Dimensionally, everything's the same. The difference is this whole added section to the course. So this little section right here would be the same section that would be used for the fixed only, but you add the zigzag element to it along with some hurdles and other poles to it to complete the process. This picture over here off to the left is an example of the goalpost task. It's a 6-inch PVC constructed vertical structure with a 4-inch PVC 10-foot tube that's placed on top of on top of and then placed back down on the ground on the base. It's 2 tasks. First task is to pick it up, place it. Second task is to remove it and put it back down on the ground inside those poles. It's a fairly challenging task. It's a very light load. You have to be aligned properly. If you're twisted just a little bit, it's definitely not going to work, and you're going to definitely mess the task up. So it's a fairly challenging little task.
And this is with forks, right, Rob?
That task is with forks. So we're literally, this tube is sitting down here to begin with. You pick it up, you place it up on top, put your forks back on the ground. That ends that task. Then you come back up, pick it up, place it back down again inside of those pole bases there, remove the forks, touch the ground, and complete that task. So we've got 2 fork specific tasks, that one, and I can show you this one real quick. It's about 2 minutes long. This is the stacking pallet task. This is done during one of the pilot events. You see he's carrying the tube in the background. That's the pole task in the background. This is the next task where you have to align the machine, pick up a pallet from a box. It's a 4-foot by 42-inch plastic pallet. There's some very specific standards on that for height, for weight, etc. Pick it up. Kind of makes a little bit of a mistake here by going back a little too far the wrong direction, but you'll see he makes a correction, which is hard to see, but on the far side there, you see those little orange cones on the ground? Those are those little discs that you can buy for, soccer practice. I think they actually sell them at Amazon as soccer cones. Those are placed 6 feet apart along that 60-foot long corridor. So this task requires you to pick up the pallet, back up through the driving range. If you cross the line, you lose points. If you hit poles and bases, you lose points, etc. And then stack that pallet on top of the other pallet. Once the pallet is stacked, the forks are removed. That task is complete. You're also seeing in the foreground the zigzag corridor for the rotating telehandler, which is a bit of a tricky little process as well. So here he's doing the stacking task. This task does require those pallets to be interlocked. If they're not interlocked properly, there's a deduction for that. There's a guideline for that. At some point, I think he just gives up and just sets it on top instead of interlocks. I believe I did the same thing.
Rob, you're
Hey, Rob.
muted again. There you go.
We lost you for a minute, Rob.
You're muted. Okay.
Hey, Rob, we still are having a hard time hearing you. Check your volume. It looks like you're muted. So just click your microphone, unclick it, and that way we can hear you, sir.
I hear you. For some reason, whenever I switch screens, it's not working today. I don't know why. Should hear me now. So what that was that you just saw there was this picking up from here, driving back, stacking, picking up both of them, driving back, placing one on top. And then the next task is to literally bring the machine back into the corral and extend the boom to place that first pallet back where it begins. Pretty cool little task. Takes about 10 minutes overall, separated segments of the test.
Rob, I noticed that he wasn't using the boom to place the load. Is that part of the
operator's choice?
I mean, in the telehandler operators manuals, that states that they want you to place the load with the boom, not driving like a regular straight mass forklift.
Yeah, unless you're on level, flat and level terrain,
Right.
which we have here. So it's literally operator's choice. The last task, there's no choice, because to place it back in the DA2 or DA2 there, where you see this one right here, you have to extend the boom to do it. So
Okay.
we had operators that would park 40 feet away and use boom extension. We had operators that would drive right up into it, especially when picking. When picking, it's a little bit easier to drive into it. When placing, it's a little bit easier to extend and retract. So it's operator choice. This is the zigzag corridor, which is very similar to the mobile crane zigzag corridor, except we added some complexity by adding some hurdles. There's a hurdle on each end. On the DA4 end, it's a 3-foot hurdle. Actually, it's the other way around. DA4, it's a 6-foot hurdle, about where they're standing. I just can't see the hurdle because this is one of our preliminary setups. The first time I think we ever did it was this site here. And then DA3 has a 3-foot hurdle. So there's some hurdles to go up and over, chain drags through the course, up and over and back into 3. So it's a zig and a zag. It's a 2-directional task. Very challenging. Very challenging. Some of the practical materials that are required for this is kind of a close-up of the goalpost. The goalpost is made of 6-inch Schedule 40 PVC. If anybody's got a line on some of that, please send me a text or send me a message. That stuff is tough to find right now. In fact, the big box stores have all eliminated everything over 4-inch now. So there are some industrial supplies out there, but boy, are they hard to find, as well as all the couplers to connect them, etc. So that's the goalpost. The 2 stackable interlocking pallets I mentioned. You see one there in the foreground. This particular one's black. The ones you saw in the video were white. As long as they meet the dimensions and the weight requirements and they can interlock, then they satisfy the requirements. I mentioned this earlier, but even though the machine may have a hook attachment here or a shackle attachment, as Jason mentioned, the task in the test requires the use of an attachment. It's kind of one of the it's not evaluated per se, but it is. Operating with an attachment is one of the required evaluations. Therefore, we have to install and remove the attachment as part of the process. In this case, it's just one of those 6-ton Vestal slide-ons, attaches to the fork, attaches to the backrest. It's got a load-rated hook, primarily used for any of the machines. Some of the Magni options down below include a hoist, just a regular hook attachment, or a little luffing jib with a hoist. Any of those attachments can be used as long as there is a hook or shackle connection point that is an attachment to the machine. Even a truss boom can be used. We did find with the fixed telehandler, using a truss boom that's too long makes it very, very difficult to get into that first circle where you start and begin. So a short version would work okay, but you're going to have to use a lot of tilt feature to use that attachment. But it has to be an attachment. So when we select the machine to be used, we'll either select to use a attachment that has to be remove the existing forks and add the attachment from the carriage, or add the attachment to the fork. Other practical materials, you see the load is suspended here with a 3-foot sling connection. For the fixed telehandler, we're going to use a 3-foot sling from the machine down to that 3-way. On the rotator, it's a 10-foot sling. And the reason for that is just to simulate either a winch or a suspended load that's going to have some dynamic. Without it, it was really too easy. It was just a flat boom moving the load through the course. You had a 6-foot to 10-foot. We started with a 20-foot sling. It adds that lag, it adds that swing, it adds that crane dynamic that these machines are definitely subjected to when suspending a load. So that's what we settled on, as a 10-foot sling on the rotator. Go ahead.
So you said that for the fixed boom, you have to have an attachment on it.
Correct.
So if they took the forks off of it, is it still not the same?
No, it literally will not work with that with this head coming down like it is and the profile of the hook with the 3-foot sling and the weight, it literally will not go over the hurdles and inside the hurdles without hitting the hurdles. If there's not an attachment, to the carriage or on the fork, it literally is impossible.
So I got a question. So if you got to use an attachment to do the test, but that's not what they're using in practical environment, which is actually the actual shackle point, doesn't that seem, I mean, they're not using attachment, right? They're using the actual manufacturer's hook area, but you're making them put an attachment that they're not going to use.
Well, they may, and literally we're still seeing, 40% probably using these slide-on versions or a truss boom or a truss jib or something along those lines, even with the hook and shackle attachment in play. I just saw one yesterday driving on I-5, exactly that configuration. The hook was there. They weren't using it. They were using the attachment. Why? Reach. When you need that additional reach, you have to go up and over something. You have to use that tilt feature to be able to place that load at a little bit longer distance. The requirement for the practical and the requirement for an operator to be quoted to meet the minimum competency standard required the ability to use an attachment. This was the most effective way to test that. The nice thing about that is by using this attachment, it certainly satisfies the requirements of hooking a load to the boom mounted hook or the boom mounted shackle. So in fairness, this test is actually testing more challenging. It's more exceeds requirements as opposed to barely, meeting the only requirement of that. Because look at it the opposite way, Jason. If we only tested using the hook that was attached to the boom head, then at no time was the test ever done with an attachment. You were never tested using an attachment. So then that reverts back to the employer qualification evaluation requirements.
Well,
we just felt that
an attachment, because they list it in the load chart as separate.
Interesting. In some cases they call it that. In some cases they don't. It literally, you're talking about a manufacturer or a couple manufacturers, but other manufacturers don't necessarily call it an attachment. So we went through 25 different versions of machines, and it was shocking how many use different language in that regard. So it's just the way that the test was created was based on a standard, and the standard that we decided upon because it was the only thing we could universally allow based on everything being the same. Remember, that's the thing about a certification exam. It all has to be consistent. So using a carriage mounted or fork mounted attachment was the most consistent way to do it as opposed to the boom head attachment or the boom head hook. Any other questions on the practical or the CCO certification for telehandler operators?
I have a question.
Again, I've got a video I'm going to show you at the end here. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I'm Dan Cabot here. We have forklift operators that are only class 4, sit-down counterbalance with a fixed vertical mast that need to move around objects using a hook attachment, like in a garage setting where they're below ground, and have to move longer materials through narrower openings. How are we able to get the similar certification? Do they have to learn telehandler operation before they can even get certified, or are you going to have something for these type of forklift operators?
I'm going to go back to this. There is no accredited certification for a non-telescopic forklift presently. Maybe someday there will be, but in this case, there is none. So in that regard, is that a construction-related activity or not? If it's construction-related, then 155 Part L applies. Therefore, this statement would be the most appropriate. In this regard, the employer would have to determine by contacting the certification agency which machine or which certification classification would be most similar to this? Would it be the telehandler, which you're right, it's a completely different skill set? Would it be a mobile crane? Totally different skill set. As I see it, and as the certifications that I'm familiar with, I'm not sure that there really would be one that's all that familiar. Ron, I don't know if you guys have ever addressed that at all from a management committee, but
Yeah, we did. We talked about it initially at the last meeting, the last national meeting that we had for it, for the classification specifics. And, you know, that the issue came up. Just remember that CCO is looking for federal compliance, and state compliance is different by individual states. The federal law does not include straight mast forklifts in their rationale. It was strictly to be telehandlers, telescopic or multi-use pieces of equipment. And so CCO declined to look at doing a straight mast national certification, and the committee didn't use a most similar aspect for a straight mast forklift for that reason, because frankly, it's not in the Fed. Washington State's Part L is the one that changed the verbiage to include the straight mast machines carrying a suspended load. And CCO didn't make an adaptation or a specific ruling for Washington State's language only. Plus, it's only proposed language. It hasn't been finalized yet, you know, so that's, I don't know if that muddies the water for you or not. You've got Ellen, Labor and Industry here on the call. But speaking from CCO and the committee that assigns the most similar machine, you know, we're back to talking about telehandler again, or a crane, one of the two.
Thank you. That's kind of where I thought we were, and you know, I won't speak for the state, but the reality is the Power Industrial Truck Standard, the 863, does cover construction related activities because it is the core rule. Yes, Part L is more stringent, but it does require operator qualification through demonstration and testing. Therefore, it does meet a required standard for that specific type of machine. Whether the state chooses to incorporate the requirement for operator quote unquote certification when a certification does not exist, nor is there a similar machine, is something that we'll have to move into the future. I don't think we're going to solve that right now.
Rob, can you address the technical skill set and aptitude requirement to successfully navigate this course? Because as you know, we see, you know, we'll do a couple thousand people a year and test them for CCO on cranes. And we get all manner, and when I say all, I mean all manner of experience. We get people that have never sat in a crane, and employers send them off to go get nationally certified. And, you know, it just doesn't work like that. It's a skill set that requires some touch and experience and seat time, etc. And Rob, you took this exam yourself, and you're a very adept crane operator, multiple certifications on all classifications, and have run telehandlers and straight mast machines for a long time in your career. Can you just address to the group the skill set requirements to be able to successfully navigate this course?
Yeah, absolutely. From a fixed telescope or a fixed machine, I can tell you I'm not going to say easy because it's challenging. Anytime someone's holding a stopwatch and timing you to perform a task, it's challenging. But the sight lines and the operator controls for a fixed telehandler have been universally the same for as long as I've ever seen one, 25, 30 years. Meaning the right-hand joystick does what it does, it booms up. It booms down, it extends, it retracts. The left-hand joystick is non-existent. You start pulling in one of these rotating so I think the fixed machine is I'm not going to say easy, but it's definitely an experienced forklift operator will have no problem whatsoever going through the telehandler operator certification for a fixed. Now, you add the rotating.
That's the key word, though, isn't it? Experienced?
Absolutely.
Telehandler operator, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, you add the rotator to it, and James, you've done it. I'm sure, Jason, you've done some familiarization. I've done a ton of familiarization on these machines. Manitou is now the Magnes. JLG has one that Daiichi had built, and now it's a JLG. JCB has one now. But I've noticed on every one of the machines, they've changed the joystick configuration. And this is one of the things that bit me for the first time, almost bit me bad, is that the right joystick now still controls boom up and down, but it also controls tilt on the in and out direction, on the lineal direction versus the boom up and down. And the left-hand joystick is what controls your boom extension, retraction, and your swing. That was a very, very challenging thing to overcome, because the human nature element, the automatic, telehandler operator mentality is to be able to boom up, boom down, boom in, boom out with the right joystick. And that is not the way any of these rotators are configured. Not to mention, you start throwing the swing element in there where your left hand is going laterally instead of, any other thing. It's very similar to a crane in that regard. So as a crane operator, experienced, certifier, examiner, and several of us that were in the event that I attended, the operators with crane skills and telehandler skills completed the exam. I can tell you, I barely passed the thing, and I was on all these I went through all these workshops and got a lot of hours on the machine. There's a nerve-wracking element to it, and there's a skill element, and there's a familiarization element to it, and it's a challenge. This is a very challenging practical exam. We did have some people went through it that didn't succeed. They said, no, let's just pretend we didn't even get on that machine, and let's go over and test on the fixed machine, and they did just fine. So I expect that very few people that don't have experience with the machine that's being used to test are definitely going to require some familiarization time on the machine, practice, if you will, going to require some hours on the machine before testing is completed or successfully completed. And even then, it's still I'd say probably a 60-40, whereas our mobile crane's probably even less than that. It's probably closer to 50-50 or 60-40 opportunity for a fixed telehandler operator with very little crane-related experience to succeed. A crane operator, so Dean, you're on the call, right? You guys are going to do this out at 302. So once the crane guys or gals are going through this program, they understand load dynamics, swing dynamics, function dynamics, and can multifunction the machines. Once they get familiar with the machine, I don't think they're going to have very many problems. But the two things are different. That's all there is to it. It's a challenge. It's a challenge.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see, so that was it as far as the presentation of the CCO certification. I do have some other things just to point out. I mentioned CCO is now CCO. It used to be NCCCO. It was a mouthful. It still says it on some of their books, but they've abbreviated and trademarked the CCO logo. I did mention that pencil paper exams are changing over to computer-based events only throughout next year. And by the end of next year, I believe, John, correct me if I'm wrong, but by the end of 2023, there will be no longer any pencil paper exams offered for any of the certification programs. It will all have to be an event-based or a computer-based test of some nature. We, as practical examiners, are now called proctors moving forward, or invigilators, as the term applies. Our practical exams are going to transition to tablet-based. So literally, you perform an exam, You sign the tablet, hit submit. Once we get Wi-Fi or submit the batch to CCO, they'll get those results. They'll get those exams quicker to be able to grade them and score them, and it should be a fairly smooth process. The operator certification. Go ahead.
Hey,
The operator.
Just got a question. So
Yep.
through all this, the only thing you didn't mention is the 2,000 pound rule? Does this make this all mute, or is that gone now?
2,000 pound rule. Why would that affect the telehandler? I don't know a single telehandler that's not rated over 2,000.
Well, I mean, you said they have to be used in attachment. Most jib attachments, 12-foot jibs, only are rated basically at 2,000 pounds.
Machine rating has nothing to do with the attachment rating.
So it has
it's
to
the
be
machine
rated.
Now let me ask you
the
one question here, because we have a jib winch on the Magni that reduces the machine's capacity down to a maximum of 1,760 pounds. Now again, it still has a hook, and it's obviously in a winch configuration. A lot of times they use it for setting panels and such, but with the attachment itself derating the machine, obviously it can go on a 13,000 pound machine, but as soon as you stick that attachment on, puts you under that 2,000. How does that play out in this?
And that's a good question, because Jason, your question is, when you put a manual attachment on the machine doesn't the load chart acknowledges it, but the machine doesn't. The Magnis or the Manitous or the JCBs and the JLGs all have QR code readers that sense that attachment and literally change the machine configuration and capacity limitations with an overload protection system to that under 2,000 pound. I don't know if Bill's willing to answer that or not. He is on paternity leave. Are you willing?
I would love to actually check out the machine with you. If you would send me an invite, we can work something out. That'd be great to check it out.
Yeah, happy to. And then another question I had for you, Bill, is obviously with this stuff coming into effect, we kind of want to be on the leading edge of it. What's a grace period? Do you guys, I mean, if you had to throw a dart at a board, what's the grace period going to be on getting people up to speed on all this new certification stuff?
That's above my pay grade, but I'm proposing we give at least 6 months to get people, after the rule goes into effect. I still want an additional 6 months, but that's above my pay grade, so I couldn't say.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, just because otherwise you bring a lot of things to a halt if that's going to go into effect fairly early with people not being able to, I'm sure you guys are going to have a backlog once this gets all settled.
Absolutely. I kind of thought the same thing as Bill is right around January of next year, 24, okay. Probably ish. But yeah, it's all going to depend when that rule becomes final.
Okay, right on. Appreciate the info.
No problem. One of the other big changes that CCO is making is that whoever does the training cannot administer the practical exam or the evaluation if it's done in that order. So if somebody were to go through a training program at a trade school or something where they spend a couple of weeks being trained and they're doing demonstrations, et cetera, the logical progress would be at the end of the training, there would be testing. That cannot be done by the person that did the training. There's a separation of church and state being enforced in the future here, where the examiner, evaluator, proctor cannot be the same person that was the instructor or trainer of that person. And there's even a 12-month window there. So if somebody were to go through one of my classes and I trained them and they didn't succeed on the practical exam, for example, they failed and they wanted to retest 6 months later, I wouldn't be able to administer that practical because I was involved in training that individual. So we're managing that. We're creating some processes and procedures to manage that starting, I believe, April 1st or so of next year, where we'll incorporate some strategies into that. But one of those strategies is going to include having multiple examiners and multiple people that have the ability to perform these. So there may be an effect that could affect the client in this case that's trying to schedule a class to be able to properly organize and schedule things to be able to make it happen and within a reasonable time. We may ask some things that are a little bit unusual as far as being able to get the machine set up in advance and have the candidates prepared in advance as opposed to being done as part of the class. So it's just something that we envision coming down the pike. One of the other things that really, I'm not sure who on the call would be affected by this. A lot of our electrical trades individuals and companies use digger derricks, but they use them configured as a crane without the auger, without the digger, ability. They just don't need that. They bought a digger derrick on a used sale market or what have you. They're using it as a crane to pick and place materials outside of the exemptions. Effective immediately, CCO no longer allows a digger derrick that's built to the 81031 standard to be used for the mobile crane practical examination. And that literally became effective last week. So we have clients that have used them for years as their demonstration for practical exams. But as of now, with the new standards that are out there, the new accreditations, requirements, et cetera, if the machine is not built to the B30.5 standard, it cannot be used for practical testing for a mobile crane. So that could impact some of you. So make sure you plan that in advance if you're currently doing mobile crane certification. Some other significant updates to 155 Part L, just reviewing it again after about 6-8 months of the last time I'd seen it. The lift director qualification has been clarified and will be required when the rule becomes effective, although right now the requirements and responsibilities for a lift director are included under the duties of assigned personnel in 155 Part L. So if you've been on a job site with a crane, you've met your friendly state crane compliance officer, and one of his first questions was, who's the lift director? Well, the qualification requirements for that will be clarified and finalized, and a qualification process or program will have been required. And we're going to start offering those classes, I believe, Brian, with you, starting next year.
That is correct.
You did ask about the under 2,000 pound limitation. These guys have been trying to get by with that exception for years by taking a 5,000 pound machine and putting a 1990 sticker on it. Well, now they've finally adapted the overload systems to conform to the 1990 capacities. These both, the one at the bottom is a little pick and carry straight boom versus the spider at the top. Technically, with only a 1,900 pound capacity, we're exempt from the rule. However, the state rule has added that if the machine is under 2,000 pounds but is being used inside of or on a multi-level building site during construction, they're not exempt, meaning the machine has to be certified. The rules in Part L must apply. Now, I did notice there is an exemption for operator certification. Maybe that gets addressed and clarified or corrected, especially if one of the certified agencies actually comes out with a specific certification for these machines, which rumor has it might be coming. So if that's the case, then that exemption may go away as well. Let's see, I already covered that. These are some changes that are coming to Part L. Once it's in effect, a load shall not be hoisted over the public. If a load has the potential to swing over the public, then the sidewalk, the road, or any affected public area must be marked off and cleared at all public access points prior to moving the load in that direction. That was in addition to the operations section in Part L. Again, as we've talked already, to become effective at some point over the next year or two. When hoisting loads over occupied buildings, must be a plan to minimize exposure. WAC added the responsibilities of a rigger under the duties of assigned personnel. One of the big changes I noticed, I didn't even notice it during any of the other reviews, but there's now a requirement in Part L for every crane shift inspection to be documented and retained. The OSHA regulation only requires that for monthly inspections. So I thought that was a pretty significant update or change. And the last slide here is the other significant change is working near power lines. Thankfully, and you guys at FACE could speak to this, Bill, you could speak to this. Thankfully, you're not hearing of a lot, I'm gonna knock on some wood here, you're not hearing of a lot of events or incidents where cranes in contact with power lines have resulted in serious injury, hospitalization, or fatalities, as many over the last 10 years, 12 years as in previous years, because the guidelines have been expanded. The required clearances have been clarified. The requirements for control and marking, et cetera, have been clarified. So the rule already exists to include those additional requirements. The one addition to the draft of the new rule includes the pre-lift meeting that's being done as part of the requirements must be documented, must remain on site for the duration of that machine being used on that site when that safety plan is in place as far as working near energized power lines. There's about 10 bullet points or 8 bullet points underneath this. I didn't include those, but there's a requirement of who and what and when, et cetera, that's going to be required as part of the documentation for this lift plan. So with that, I ask, how can we help? Are there any questions that we haven't asked or been answered yet? That's my contact information at the top. John Kirk is our CCO coordinator in the office down in Hillsboro. I think he's on the call. You could always go to our website, overtonsafety.com, and get any information as well as nccco.org, which definitely would provide you some clarification and answers
Hey, Rob,
to some of the questions.
If it's okay with you and Ron, can you send me the PowerPoint?
I will, yeah.
Okay,
Ron, you okay with that, I assume. So what I'd like to do, if you guys don't have, well, go ahead. If you have questions, please unmute, ask away. Otherwise, if you look, say again.
This is Ron Fowdy, University of Washington. I'm just curious about shifts or changes to general industry standards in addition to Part 155.
I haven't seen anything on 24 Part D as it applies in any way, shape, or form to cranes, rigging. The only changes I've seen, the only updates I've seen have been to 155. That
Great,
and general industry rule has been around a long time. I just,
Oh, yeah.
you know what it would take to change that?
Thank you.
It would be pretty significant. Any other questions?